Drakkenheim is a setting developed by the dungeon dudes of YouTube infamy, and now that D&D Beyond has begun adding third-party content published outside of Wizards of the Coast, I caught up with my good friend, dungeon dude and co-writer of Drakkenheim, Kelly McLaughlin, to find out exactly what makes this setting unique and what to expect from their book, Dungeons of Drakkenheim. There's a lot to discuss today, so let's get rolling.
How do I know when it started?
I see a recording.
It was being recorded. That's probably like a dead giveaway. What's up, Kelly? Thank you for joining me, my friend. It's a good excuse for us to just chit-chat and things, and then also get some of my work done for NorseFoundry and record a YouTube video.
I know, as far as I'm concerned, this is just an excuse to hang out, and I'm excited about that. So thanks for having me here.
Awesome. Okay, let's dive into the whole thing. So congratulations first. I know I've told you this like in private, but publicly, congratulations for being the second third-party creator next to Critical Role to be made official with D&D, with Drakkenheim being available on D&D Beyond. Just amazing. Congratulations, man. It's awesome.
Thank you. It's been really exciting. It's been a bit of a whirlwind, but honestly, yeah, I really like being able to say that we're the second next to Critical Role. That's just, it sounds really cool, and it's so awesome that things worked out the way that they did. I'm surprised, but delighted that we've arrived here.
So let's dive into a little bit about Drakkenheim, and then we'll look at the adventure book that's available on D&D Beyond as well. So first of all, who is responsible for the creation of Drakkenheim, and sort of what is Drakkenheim in relation to everything else within this setting?
So credit where credit's due, Drakkenheim really did start as Monty's brainchild, and what happened is, a lot of our audience, Monty and I started as a rules explanation channel. And that was kind of our thing. But, you know, a lot of our fans, as it started to grow, when we were at like even just 500 subscribers or something like that, a lot of people were starting to ask, hey, we want to see you play D&D. You talk about the rules, you talk about building characters, you talk the talk, but can you walk the walk? So Monty and I had brainstormed together a few different campaign concepts. My big contribution was telling him that I wanted a dark gothic city, something akin to Dark Souls or Bloodborne, and that was kind of my only input at the beginning. Monty had this idea that initially he said was a throwaway idea that we were going to do 6 to 12 episodes of and see how it went. Naturally, it went well, and it grew from there. Yeah. Well, so we started, but like, I just knew right away. I'm like, when we start this, like, he was like, we're only going to do 12 episodes. And I felt like I knew. I'm like, sure. We're going to, like, I'm going to put all my effort into this, and we're going to make it a thing. But, you know, Monty is an exceptional storyteller. That was the other thing that I knew, is Monty's the best DM I've ever had. So I was like, we're going to turn cameras on. People are going to see you DMing. They're going to either love or hate me as a player, but we also have Joe and Jill there to even things out a bit. And we got together this lovable group of friends. I love them. I was hoping that other people would love them too. And it did. It worked out. And what I will say is my contributions came in a little later. For a long time, I was just the player. And when I say just the player, Monty is a very player-focused dungeon master, so we did get to create a lot of the narrative. If you watch the first season of our show, we influence a lot of the world building through our backstories and our character growth that Monty then weaves into the story. So when it came time to actually write the book, not only did I get to explore those narratives a little deeper, but for my part, the lovely thing about being a dungeon master is you actually only write what the players are interacting with most of the time. So I remember Monty was like, here's the city of Drakkenheim. And I was like, ooh, we never went over here. What's over there? And Monty's like, I don't know. That's for you to write. So my favorite bit about the book is that all the pieces that you don't see in the show were a lot of it was influenced by me. And that was how I got to contribute to what started as Monty's world. And now we kind of agree, generally in conversation, we'll say it's pretty 50-50 now on the world of Drakkenheim being both of ours. Even though I've been a player in the campaign for most of it, the world has been broadened in a way that was only possible from the collaboration of both of our imaginations. So it started as like a Dark Souls-esque mini story, and now it's turned into a whole world that you can explore.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Drakkenheim itself is a city, right? What's outside of the city walls? Have we ventured there yet?
So that's something that the first book actually starts with a disclaimer saying your players should buy into the idea that you are in the surrounding area around Drakkenheim or in the city proper. In the first book, we detail a small town near Drakkenheim called Emberwood Village, which is kind of the safe haven for players. One way to think of Drakkenheim is that the city itself is almost structured like a mega dungeon. That when you go in, you're in, like that's it, you're in adventure territory. You cannot take long rests in the city due to the contaminating haze that is enveloping it from the Eldritch meteor that crashed into the city of Drakkenheim. So a bit of lore. Okay, I should establish the lore.
Let's zoom in on that one right there.
To answer your question, I will first start at the beginning and we'll talk about the city and then we'll move outside of it. So Drakkenheim was the capital city of the nation of Westamar in our setting. And 15 years prior to the start of the campaign, a meteor of magical origin, nobody's really sure where it came from, but it was full of concentrated magical energies. And it crashes right into the heart of the capital city. The royal family is assumed dead or missing, and everybody who is in the city either died or became horribly contaminated by this uncontrollable magic known as delirium. And delirium causes eldritch contamination and mutations. It also causes a thick haze to cover the city. So the way that this works in our setting is that when you go into the city of Drakkenheim, the haze is sort of toxic. It's almost like radiation. And so you can stay in the city, but you don't want to be in there for probably about 24 to 48 hours. Otherwise, you need to roll to see if you take contamination levels. And if you try to take a long rest in the city, you're probably gaining levels of contamination. And so long rests just don't work in the city. So when you're planning adventures, you usually are in Emberwood Village and you need to plot your course into the city to where you need to get to and then back out again. There's going to be wandering groups of monsters, people who are horribly contaminated and who have turned into mutated creatures. And everybody who goes to Drakkenheim goes there for a reason. That's something we've baked into the setting as well. And also a quote that Monty always uses is people who don't have a reason to go to Drakkenheim won't go there. So it's very important when you're doing a Drakkenheim campaign that your character is drawn to the city for a reason. This is a city of dangers and adventures. No regular person is venturing to the contaminated wasteland. It's like when Chernobyl had recently gone through its thing, nobody was like, oh, I should go back to Chernobyl for a vacation. Like, you're not doing that. It's like you're going there because you lost something or you need something. Like, it's a dangerous place. So when you are playing a Drakkenheim campaign, you're mostly going to the city. We did in our second book, Sebastian Crow's Guide to Drakkenheim, explore the wider world, which something that was important to us is that the world of Drakkenheim is relatively mundane. We imply adventures, there's some interesting things going on elsewhere in the world, but mostly it's pretty low stakes adventure. Yes, there's a few dragons, but they actually mostly leave people alone and only come out every 100 years to eat. Yes, there's a few wars. Actually, it's pretty ripe with war, but mostly the world is that of national differences. Something that we were very specific on in our setting is almost every nation is full of all of the different ancestries you can play in D&D. It's just a matter of Illyrians, Westamarians, and Caspians, the three major nations, don't necessarily get along all the time, and so it's mostly wars between rival nations or the civil war that has been happening in Westamar since Drakkenheim fell over who's going to take over the throne. And so that is kind of the backdrop of the setting. We have a lot of history in the world, between a little bit of a rivalry between sorcerers, mages, I'll say, so any magic, any arcane magic and divine magic. There was a bit of a rivalry there for a few years, but mostly the implications of the setting are that besides war and people trying to live their lives in a war-stricken continent, it's been relatively mundane until a meteor started turning everybody into monsters and mutants. And that's why Drakkenheim is supposed to be the most important and most interesting thing that's happened in the setting.
The city of Drakkenheim is basically just like mission focused. Like, you have something to do. Ah, crap, it's in the city. We have to get in, do the thing, and then get out.
Yeah, we designed what's called personal quests. So we say that every player, as they're building their characters, as well as their backgrounds and their races and their classes and subclasses, you're also going to choose a personal quest. And the personal quests are designed to tie your character to the narratives of the campaign. They're things like, maybe you're a lost heir to the throne of Drakkenheim, so you're coming to claim that throne for yourself. Or perhaps you have a debt that you need to pay to some really bad people, and you know for a fact that the best treasure is lost in Drakkenheim. There is also the chance that a loved one has traveled to Drakkenheim and joined one of the 5 rival factions that occupy the city. And you want to either join that faction, kill that faction, save them from the faction, overthrow that faction, or various other things. There's a ton of personal quests to choose from, and we also give you guidelines to design your own. But the important thing about the personal quest, it A, drives your character into the city of Drakkenheim, and B, will force you to get tangled up with the factions and the overarching plot of the campaign.
So usually in my setting videos, I go into like what races are available to play, like within the setting, and if there's any specific ones. I know there's no new ones coming in this book, at least, but is it just a spread of you can play anything, or are there some restrictions?
So there are implications that Monty and I have put into the book on the way we see the setting. The thing about creating a setting, I think, is that you have to be okay with the fact that people are going to do what they want to do, and that's the joy of D&D. So yes, there are parties out there that are playing like an Aarakocra, a Haragon, and an Owlin for their adventuring party. Monty and I very specifically write in the book that for, again, with the mundane setting, we see most of it as human or human adjacent. So I'm going to say like 75% of the population of our setting in the implied version of it is human. There are a lot of half-elves, and oddly enough, tieflings, dragonborn. We can't say this in our book because of SRD things, but Aasimar are also mentioned. We say angel descendants. So one of the implied ideas in our setting in the backdrop is that years and years ago, when magic was first introduced to the setting, there was a reign of terror known as the Sorcerer Kings, where magic users became all-powerful and took over the continent. There was a huge war, and that's where the divine religion in our setting, the Sacred Flame, formed as a rebellion against the Sorcerer Kings, and that's why there was a bit of tension between divine and arcane magic for quite a while. But when the Sorcerer Kings were ruling, they sought out more power. So they sought out beings from beyond the stars, such as demons and angels. They made deals with dragons and other creatures, hint warlocks, that gave them powers to become better. And through their bloodlines, the Sorcerer Kings were the first to have offspring that were tiefling or Aasimar or dragonborn because of the way that they infused their bloodlines with magical entities. So that's kind of an implied narrative element and why those races exist in our setting. Also, there's a huge history with the dwarves, where elves originally came from. They weren't native to the world, but they appeared there. We have a lot of history on why races are there. When we get into the more exotic races, we kind of just hand wave that in the book and say, all people exist in this world, but if you're playing something more interesting, it's up to you to decide where they came from. We give a few hints in our second book as to the further implications of that, but we really wanted to drive home in our core narrative that the setting is relatively mundane fantasy, so you don't see a lot of Aarakocra or Owlin or Haragons, but Drakkenheim is the place that they would go if they did exist, because that's the place where nobody bats an eye at exotic and weird people showing up to go adventuring in the city. People are much more interested in, you're a Caspian, those folk are arrogant because they're from Caspia, but we think that's fine, but like we don't want to be like, we don't like elves. It's just not a place for that. People see elves walking around and they're like, hey, it's an elf, cool. All races exist in the world of Drakkenheim. If you want to play whatever you want to play, cool. If you want to stick to the low fantasy sort of mentality, Monty's general rule for us is one person can play something weird. Everybody else should be either human or human adjacent.
So let's dive into the factions.
Yeah.
That's, I guess, where the big sort of divides between the people of Drakkenheim are, right?
Yeah, so in the story of the Drakkenheim campaign, the main thing that you're going to do is decide which factions you agree with. And this is not a Unite the Factions campaign. That's something that Monty and I are always very specific on. If any DM runs it as a Unite the Factions, I feel like you're doing a disservice to it, because the point of a Drakkenheim campaign is that no two Drakkenheim campaigns will ever be the same. It's not a linear campaign by any means. There is no ultimate evil behind the city of Drakkenheim. You're not there to fight an ultimate evil. What's going to happen is, while you're dealing with your personal quest, you're going to get tangled up in the factions, and you're going to decide, oh, I agree with this one or two factions, but in doing so, one or two other factions are going to strongly disagree, and they're going to want to stop you. So we have 5 factions, pretty traditional in their sort of core themes, but I really love them. So we have the Amethyst Academy, which is the Mages Guild. Sort of the quick lore on them is that after the tyranny of the Sorcerer Kings, there was a long period of time where Mageborn were just picked up and killed by the Divine because they thought, no, you're all going to be evil. The Amethyst Academy formed years and years ago as sort of a way of saying, hey, why don't we protect Mageborn, teach them to use their powers, and allow them to help in the world and be a helpful force. It is known that the Amethyst Academy has a lot of secrets, and so other factions are going to be uneasy about them. We're going to get into that. But they're sort of a combination of a magical school mixed with the Illuminati. So they teach magical children. You get scooped up, brought to magic school, taught all of your spell casting and how to use it properly. But then there's also this secret organization of high-ranking, powerful mages that are like trying to call shots and weave the tangled mysteries of the multiverse in their secret layers and things like that. So you have both elements going on, and the Amethyst Academy is extremely interested in delirium, because this magical crystal that's formed in the city from the meteor, they want to know what it does. It seems to have magical properties, so they want to learn to use it and control it. That's their main goal. But next to them, you have the Silver Order. They're from the nation of Illyria, and they are a group of paladins ordained by the Church of the Sacred Flame. Their whole shtick is they protect the realm from entities of magical danger. So if anything of unknown origin is emerging in the world, they're there to deal with it. Naturally, when a meteor crashes into a capital city in the neighboring nation and monsters start to pour out, they're on their way over there. They've set up camp just outside the city, and they're trying to figure out how to destroy all delirium. They want to go to the heart of the meteor in the crater and destroy delirium at its heart, but getting to the crater is very dangerous, and they need the party's help to do so. Naturally, you can imagine it's kind of hard to get the Amethyst Academy and the Silver Order to agree, but maybe there's a way. Next to that, there is the followers of the falling fire. So there is a recent divide in the religion of the sacred flame. When the meteor struck Drakkenheim, there were those who saw it as a prophecy, and a new religion has formed known as the falling fire. And so, led by a prophet named Lucretia Matthias, she has led a pilgrimage of people into the city where they have discovered a way to survive in the haze. And she has a lot of visions on what's going on in the city and why it is actually a sacred place that needs to be protected. More on that if you decide to get behind the following fire, but they're a very interesting faction.
This seems problematic, but okay.
I love it when I hear about a group who gets behind the falling fire, because a lot of people often write them off immediately as, oh, they're problematic, but the one thing that we make sure of is in the book, they're written in a way that they have all the factions have a lot of good points. And honestly, when you're venturing into the city and somebody says, hey, if you follow us, we can help you survive in here way easier. It's really compelling to be like, oh, they clearly know how, so what's their secrets? The last two factions, we have the Hooded Lanterns. So they are the remnants of the city guard and the remnants of many of the military of the Civil War and the several previous expeditions into Drakkenheim that failed horribly. So it's a group of sort of like guerrilla soldiers, they're rangers more or less, who their main goal, they care a little less about delirium. They see it as a major problem because their main goal is that they want to reclaim the throne of Drakkenheim, find a missing heir, and put them on the throne and make sure that Drakkenheim is reclaimed and that some semblance of a monarchy is put back in place and that they can continue doing their jobs. It's quite sad that a lot of the horrible monsters in the city might have been former Hooded Lanterns. Last one is the Queensmen. And the Queensmen, in the fall of Drakkenheim, a sort of mysterious figure has risen up and banded together all of the bandits, thugs, villains, thieves. They got all of the gangs, put them together under one banner, and now rules them from like a mysterious stronghold somewhere known as the Queen of Thieves. And she seems to have eyes and ears everywhere and know everything going on in the city. And she loves that the city is in ruin because, as far as she's concerned, it doesn't need a ruler because she's the ruler of the city. And as long as it's in chaos and she has her thumb on control of that chaos, then nobody can stop her. And, there are people who love what the Queen of Thieves stands for. And the Queen of Thieves campaign, if you have a group that's like, all of these factions are just too goody-goody and they want to fix everything, and it's like, no, we just want to kill these monsters, make money, get rich, and live our best life on the fringes of what has become a sort of wild frontier, then the Queensmen is maybe the way to go.
The next section that I usually do is unique monsters, which sounds like there's going to be a crap ton of them, and most of them are ex-humans.
So I'll try to narrow this down so I don't go on too long of a ramble. One of the most generic monster types is we have something called delirium dregs. And this is the really unfortunate thing that happens to people who spend too much time in Drakkenheim or get way too close and touch delirium. By the way, touching delirium, not a great idea. It speeds up the process of everything. We actually have a monster stat block where you can choose different mutations that have afflicted this creature. And so you can have everything from one eye that shoots beams, a mouth in their chest, tentacle arms, all sorts of fun stuff. And they kind of occupy a lot of the city. Other than that, the other thing that happened in Drakkenheim, to talk about specific monster groups, is all of the creatures that inhabited the city kind of mutated, not in the same way as humans, but they almost turned into monstrous versions of what they were. So you have the ratlings, which is all of the rats that used to occupy the sewers have grown larger, smarter, and are now out of control in the city. You have the deep dregs, which are fish folk who serve a creature known as the Duchess, which lives in the sewers. And I should say the ratlings all answer to a little critter known as the Rat Prince, who has aspirations for eating everything in the whole city. So the Rat Prince is kind of one of the vile ultimate bosses. Same with the Duchess. We also have the Harpies. All the birds in the city have become Harpies, and they're led by a character known as the Crimson Countess, who occupies one of the largest towers in the city, which is a safe haven for adventurers if they can claim it back from her. You have all of the dogs of the city there used to be wild dogs in the city. They've multiplied in numbers, and they're known as the Garmir, and they are packs of wild dog soldiers led by a creature known as the Lord of the Feast. And he revels in the hunt. Him and his dogs hunt the city for adventurers, and adventurers are their favorite because they give them a bit of a challenge, but they love hunting adventurers and feasting on them and hanging their skulls outside of their stolen territory. They've claimed the cathedral that used to be a religious site, and now it's their sort of den. And our last big monster, the constructs of the city. The city used to be full of constructs that were there to protect the city. Gargoyles, statues, and a great construct known as the Executioner, whose job, of course, was a construct who was the Executioner, who occupied a central location in the city and would do the public executions. But sadly, delirium affects everything, including constructs. So the constructs of the city have now grown a sentience of their own, and they are mindless, and they will attack and kill anything that sort of breaks their code. So the gargoyles, for example, were originally designed to protect the walls of Drakkenheim from intruders. Well, now everything's an intruder. The Executioner was supposed to execute criminals, but now everybody who enters his sight is a criminal that needs to be executed. So you have all of these monsters, as well as the horrible mutations, which I will say that the deeper you get into the city, we have a creature known as the Amalgamation. I'm not going to say where they are, but they are kind of one of the ultimate monsters of the setting. And you'll find them, I'm sure, in any Drakkenheim campaign.
They sound lovely. So you have like the delirium that causes contamination, and you mentioned earlier contamination levels. Can we like scratch the surface, these mechanics and how they work?
Absolutely. So when you're using contamination, we linked it in essence to the concept of how exhaustion works currently. So there's 6 levels. It's a little bit more forgiving in a way. And the reason for that is because we want players to ride the line of the dangers of the city. So the first and second level of contamination are not super effective. Let's just say the first 2 levels, you're going to keep adventuring. I think when you take a short rest, you're going to get half your hit points back on your dice rolls if you're using hit dice. And then as you start to gain more levels, it starts to affect things like your attacks do less damage. And then by the time you hit level 5, you fall unconscious. And level 6, you have a horrible transformation, and you transform into a monster of the DM's discretion. And there are very, very, very few ways to reverse that. There might be a couple, but the cost is extremely high. So essentially, if you have a party member who gets 6 levels of contamination, you're going to go on a separate quest if you want to save them. Like, that's adding a new quest to the game. With this, we paired our mutation table. So very simply, the way that it works, we have a table of 20 mutations that you can acquire. Some of them might be beneficial, some of them might be horrible. Every time you gain a level of contamination, you roll a d6. If the number on the die is equal to or less than the number of contamination levels you have, you get to roll for a mutation. So with 1 level of contamination, if you roll a 1 on the die, you're getting a mutation. As you gain more, the chances of mutation are more likely. They might include things like giant insect legs explode out of your back and you now gain spider climb. Or your veins start to glow, and if you're a spellcaster, you gain additional spell slots. You can have a random tumor grow on you that turns into a familiar. You can, there's a
Don't like
lot
that. Nope.
there's a lot of eldritch horror elements. You like a lot of it. There's some pretty bad stuff too. Like I remember, I was all excited when I got to roll a mutation. I was like, all right, here we go. Let's go spider climber extra spell slots. And then I ended up losing like all my teeth, and they just fell out because I was horribly contaminated.
So you grow a third ear on your temple or something like.
There are like you grow extra arms. Your arms turn into tentacle arms. All sorts of like wild stuff. So it's a really fun table, and honestly, the joy that we've had is that although it can be detrimental, we have found our party actually gets excited about rolling contamination. When you get 1 or 2 levels, you're kind of like, ooh, if I get a like you don't want to mutate, but if you do, you're kind of excited to see what you get. Yeah. And that's the fun part. When you leave Drakkenheim, there are ways to remove contamination. We take a lot of inspiration from my favorite genre of video game is Metroidvania style games, where as you acquire new tools, you can venture further into the dungeon that is your Metroidvania game. Much in the same way, we've introduced new spells and magic items. And a lot of them, their purpose is helping you deal with contamination, the haze, and mutations. And so on the outset of the campaign, you don't have a lot. So venturing into the outskirts of the city are going to be the safest bet until you start to acquire tools and spells, such as Purge Contamination, that are now going to allow you to venture beyond the walls into the inner city and eventually to the most dangerous places like the cathedral, the mage's tower, the castle, and the crater. So finding and acquiring the skills, tools, and gear to venture further into the city is part of the campaign, and you're going to do that through exploring and adventuring.
So before we move on from contamination, when you get to 6 levels and you have the monstrous transformation, are you still in control of your character?
No, that's when the DM gets to take control, and that's when, like, so rather than just dying, we make it way worse. If a player character becomes horribly contaminated and gains their 6th level, the DM gets to remove their player character and slap down whatever they feel like as a monster that has just erupted from your former friend. And now it's up to the rest of the party. Are they going to A, flee, B, fight and kill their former friend, or C, try to contain it and figure out what to do? I've heard stories of adventuring parties that had to flee because they couldn't bring themselves to kill them. And now that player character is a monster roaming the streets, and they bring in a new character, and part of their goal is to figure out how to cure that, and then go find the monster, capture it, drag it to where they can get it fixed, and then bring that former character back. Again, it's very hard to do. There are a few ways, but you're going to have to figure that out in the city.
So you had mentioned a new spell. Is there more than this Purge Contamination in the book? Like, can you give us like a little overview of like the new spells and items that you might have?
So there are 2 types of spells introduced in this book. There are new spells that help you deal with contamination, such as Purge Contamination is one of the early spells available to all spellcasters. Very simply, you can spend a minute to remove levels of contamination from a creature. It takes a while, so it's one of those spells that you're going to venture out of the city and then use it to try to help your friends remove contamination. Later on, you can learn a spell like Neutralizing Field, which is a concentration spell where you put a field around you of 10 feet. And as long as you stay in that field, you have advantage on your saves against contamination. You're resistant to necrotic damage, and basically it helps you fend off the effects of contamination. At very high levels, there's some more interesting spells that you can learn, but those are secret at the beginning of the campaign, and you learn them from finding the people in the city who know them. Also, we have contaminated spells, and this is where we really treat the players to ride the line of contamination. Contaminated spells are very powerful. They punch above their weight class. So you might see a 1st level spell or a 2nd level spell that can actually do a lot more damage than you think a 1st or 2nd level spell usually would. But whenever you cast one of these spells, you're going to gain a level of contamination. So spellcasters can choose to learn these spells and take these spells and cast them at the cost of whether they think they can afford a level or two of contamination. Some examples of these: Warp Bolt. It's a second level evocation spell. You gain a level of contamination when you cast it, and it does much higher damage, has a longer range, and you can kind of repeat that damage. And so we have these contaminated spells that like Ray of Contamination and those sorts of things that can really up the ante on your spellcasting. One of my other favorites is Ride the Rifts, which is sort of lightning bolt mixed with teleportation. So you shoot like a beam of lightning and you appear at the other end of it, and any creature that you hit along that teleport, we have artwork for it that shows like a character ripping through, and like it's like the person they tore through, their soul is being removed from their body as you tear through them. Also, we do have magic items that both play with what delirium is capable of, and also items that help you fend off the contamination. So this is where the Amethyst Academy might have a good point, because they are the only people in the world who manufacture magic items. And you can get some pretty cool magic items from delirium. Some of those magic items are the Bottled Comet, which is a glass orb with a shard of delirium that when you throw, it creates an arcane explosion. So it's basically magic grenades. But then they also have like delirium-infused swords that do magical damage, or delirium crystal focus for spellcasters. But then you have magic items like the Hazewalker plate, which is plate armor that fully, like, it's sealed plate armor that allows you don't need, it has its own self-contained breathing apparatus, and you're basically immune to a bunch of different damage types. You don't need to breathe the air anymore. So what I love is the Hazewalker plate. If you're venturing into where the crater is, which is the highest contamination area, you have to check, I think, every minute for contamination when you're in the crater. But I love to picture almost the sort of like space theme of characters in like a spacesuit venturing into a dangerous territory. And then we also have simple potions like Aqua Delirium and Aqua Expurgo. Aqua Delirium is a potion made from delirium that if a spellcaster drinks it, they regain spell slots. Aqua Expurgo is a potion that allows you to, it gives you basically legendary resistance against contamination. So you get 3 automatic passes if you fail a saving throw against contamination. But you have to learn how to make these in the setting.
Yeah. So the first book, the book that is on D&D Beyond, is an adventure book. So without giving spoilers, can you give us like sort of a back of the book sort of overview of it?
I mean, a lot of it has already been stated, but we wanted to write a campaign where we don't know what your end goal is going to be. We don't know who your great villain is, and we don't know which adventure sites you're going to visit in what order. We have written 20 adventure sites that are broken up by outer city, inner city, and the kind of heart of Drakkenheim. The outer city is going to be for the early level play, the inner city is for the mid-level play, and the heart of Drakkenheim is for the high-level campaign.
I love you, Kelly, and
I love you too, Jay.
I love everything that you guys are doing. I was a longtime fan of the Dungeon Dudes channel before I was a friend, so thank you for hanging out with me and sharing. We'll throw links in the description of the video to go and purchase all of the books and whatnot, but yeah, thanks, man.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
We'll continue the chat after I press stop recording.